Welcome to Whiskey Uncut. I'm your host, Paul, joined, as always, by James.
Hey, 3 Wednesdays in a row. We're doing well.
Dude, this is a record.
I think it is. We usually have something that interferes, whether it's travel or people getting sick or whatever. But yeah, we've done well.
Yep. So, as always, if you are watching this on Malt Mondays, go over to Whiskey Uncut and YouTube and subscribe there also, because that's our real channel. We're just doing it both places right now. But so today we wanted to, it's going to be a little bit shorter show because James has plans.
I got stuff to do.
He's got stuff he's got to do.
Yeah,
So
I got things to do.
we're going to skip the news segment today, and we're just going to get right into our topic pretty much. You messed up the display, James. You're supposed to put all this in order. Yeah,
it
see on camera it looks chaotic now.
It was crowding me though, Paul. I felt crowded.
Yeah, well, I guess we can put some. We'll put this one down because we're not going to talk about that.
They
one
don't care.
The people care. It's the aesthetics. Liz B is saying that J. Henry, she's never had it, but she's heard good reviews. And
Oh man, yeah. If you haven't had J. Henry, that is an absolute must. And I might know somebody who owns a company that has some J. Henry available. So
Two Soul Spirits.
Yeah.
So if you haven't tried it, go to twosoulspirits.com and get the one that James picked.
Yeah, if we have any left. To be honest, I don't even know if we have any left yet. But that's the whole reason I got into doing what I'm doing was tasting J. Henry. So if you have a chance, I recommend it.
I think she was saying that based on our waiting screen is the image with all the J. Henry bottles.
Oh, yeah.
So anyway, our topic today is Reddit. James,
Yeah.
are you familiar as an old man? Are you familiar with the Reddit?
Sort of. I mean, I know what Reddit is, and I've dabbled with Reddit for a while. I considered having a Reddit thing for Two Souls, but nobody uses it anymore, so I didn't really pay much attention to it.
No, people use Reddit a lot.
Not when I was doing it. Like the whiskey things were dead, and nobody was really following it. But they were following it on IG. They were following on other things.
The thing with the Reddit is there's lots of different subreddits for everything.
No,
so
now it's getting complicated.
Yeah, exactly. It kind of is.
You lost me at subreddits.
So there's a specific Reddit for bourbon, or a specific Reddit for whiskey reviews, or for single malt, or for Scotch, or there's dozens. So depending on which one, some are very active, some aren't. But our topic today is going to be, and I guess you're right, this is a little crowded because I can't use the
you
keyboard.
can't use your glasses or the keyboard.
Although I don't think I need the keyboard. But the Reddit basically is someone on Reddit last year, towards the end of the year, posted what they called the 2023 Reddit Whiskey Year-End Review. And they reviewed, and let's get to this. They reviewed 4,109 whiskey reviews. So
they went back and they looked at all of these reviews that were posted.
Yeah, exactly. So they pulled up some stats on all of these. And this is kind of a recap post. So I'll go through this a little bit and then we'll discuss it. So this is specifically from Bourbon, our Bourbon. So there's other ones out there. There's more out there, but this is a review specifically targeted towards bourbon. So out of 4,109 reviews, 2,194 different whiskeys were reviewed. Now, not all of these were bourbon, and this came from 482 different users. So I wanted to talk about this because, you and I often talk about whiskey reviews from the perspective of, I've done whiskey reviews, you've done whiskey reviews for outlets and stuff. Yours have been in written format, which is a little more similar to theirs, mine in video. But we've talked about how everybody has different rating systems, and so how do you homologate, or not homologate, but what is that sound?
I don't know. I think that's the cat. Yeah, she's trying to get out of the room.
Okay. So how do you get the a score? How do you read a review and know whether it's going to be
how do you get
relevant
uniform scoring across all the different reviewers?
And so you can't really, but I think this is a cool approach as far as how do you kind of get something that's going to be representative of the overall market, right?
Sure.
And I thought about doing this before of going through all the YouTubers and saying what they ranked each thing. But then it's like, how do you compare 4 barrels to 96 points to ABC
Yeah,
to
that gets difficult.
buy, don't buy? So everyone on Reddit used a 10-point system for this review. And so he broke down the whiskey reviews by type. So 30,000 different bourbons, 542 different ryes, 118 Tennessee whiskeys, 81 single malts, and then it gets smaller down there.
I think there's one rice.
Yeah, with 4 light whiskeys, 2 white whiskeys, and 1 rice whiskey. And so, but the part that I wanted to talk about specifically, is the most reviewed in the top 20.
Okay.
All right. So the most reviewed whiskey, and here's the thing, I considered like sending you, just having you guess what you thought the most reviewed whiskeys were, but I was not surprised by this list. So number 1 is Elijah Craig Barrel Proof.
Yeah. And I don't know if I would have guessed that if you would have me do it blind, but it makes a lot of sense in this context because it's a buzzy bottle. Everybody hears Elijah Craig Barrel Proof and kind of goes crazy. So it's going to get you some attention, but it's also relatively easy to get. Yeah. And it's not super expensive. So that makes sense to me. I get it.
Yeah. So Elijah Craig Barrel Proof, number 3, Larceny.
Same category.
Yeah. And then some of the Knob Creek, Maker's Mark private selection down at like 6, 7, 8. So interspersed throughout here, I think there's a lot that are relatively readily available. Although we'll see once we get into this, there's specific selections from those that were the top scoring. So we have number 2, Four Roses single barrel private selection, not easy to get. Number 3, Larceny. Number 4, Booker's Bourbon, which is pretty readily available.
I don't know where you get it anymore, but people buy it. Yeah.
Well,
it used to be like ubiquitous, right? I mean, you used to be able to find Booker's in pretty much any store you went into, but I honestly don't remember the last time I've seen Booker's on a shelf anywhere.
I feel like I saw it not that long ago. It was really expensive though.
I was traveling once and I saw it for $200.
Yeah.
But that's the only time I think I've seen it.
Yeah. Found North, which
I brought today.
Which you brought today.
That's the only one on the list that I actually have.
Yep.
But yeah.
Stag, Knob Creek Single Barrel Select, Maker's Mark Private Selection, Jack Daniel's Single Barrel Barrel Proof, Russell's Reserve 13 Barrel Proof, and Elijah Craig Private Barrel Barrel Proof round out the top 10 with George T. Stagg. So,
and those are just the most reviewed.
Those are the most reviewed, along with Eagle Rare, Russell's Reserve, Private Barrel, which we have, Jack Daniel's Single Barrel Barrel Proof Rye, Four Roses Small Batch Limited Edition, and then the stuff for us peasants out there.
Yeah.
Wild Turkey 101, Wild Turkey Rare Breed, Wild Turkey Kentucky Spirit, and Blanton's Original Single Barrel, which again is rare. So I thought this was odd for one thing because like I think or maybe it wasn't surprising because although I would have expected there to be more readily available whiskey reviewed, it kind of makes sense that like people are not wasting their time, so to speak, or they don't feel compelled to review stuff that other people can buy. And it's kind of like this terrible situation where it's like even reviewers are kind of now, and I'm not necessarily calling all these people reviewers. Like some of these people, this might be the only whiskey review they've ever written. Right. But some, the people reviewers are choosing to review whiskeys also kind of as a way to be like, I got this.
Oh, for sure. And we've talked about that before on here, right? Like, I think because you were talking about with our TikTok videos and about how many hits we'll get if we just mention Weller.
Right.
Or we mention Eagle Rare, or we mention Buffalo Trace. But if we pick a really cool bottle from somebody like Jay Henry, like we're not going to get as many hits because it's just not as like buzzworthy, right? Yep. So that's the balance, I think, when you see these reviews is it's going to be heavily skewed towards allocated bottles because people want to say, hey, look what I got. There's a lot of people out there who want to try it but aren't going to get it. So there's curiosity around it. And I think that's unfortunate because then the review becomes less useful. Like, do I give a shit if somebody gives George T. Stagg a 9.5? I can't get it. So what does it matter? Like, it's just kind of a hollow review. You know what I mean? And it's kind of predictable. So
Yeah, I mean, I totally I'm of like two minds on this because on the one hand, I feel like those reviews are kind of the only way some people get to experience those bourbons. And like I remember when I was
but
early,
I mean, it just makes me mad that I don't get to try it, right?
I don't know, because like I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of like back when I was, you know, not the stalwart of the whiskey industry that I am now.
When you were a fresh shaven young
Yeah,
man.
yeah, yeah. And just thinking like, oh, I can't find these, but like I would still read reviews and it would get me excited and like maybe one day I'll get to try it. And so, you know, it's like I kind of see it from that point, but I'm seeing now, you know, back then I would see most reviewers would just be like, you know, like it is what it is. If you're lucky enough to find it, like good luck. And now I feel like a lot of these reviews start with like, because of my special relationship with so and so, you know, it's more of like a
it's a flex.
It's more of
a little bit of a flex review
than it used to be. I feel like it used to be a lot of reviewers had access to stuff just because they had done it for a while or because, you know, stuff was still somewhat available.
I was going to say that was the thing is if you had an inn at a store, it was still possible for you to get a bottle.
Right.
That day has passed. Like, I don't really see that happening too much anymore. So, yeah, I think there's a little bit more of a flex going on. And, you know, we're not really comparing apples to apples here if we're talking about reviews in 2023 versus reviews in 2016.
Right.
Like, the people in 2016 were doing it for a different reason. It's not like people were getting famous from doing whiskey reviews in 2016.
That's true.
And the number of people that were out there doing whiskey reviews, there was no such thing as an influencer. Like, you just didn't have that kind of stuff going on.
Yeah, it was very early stages.
Yeah,
it was like Ralphie. It was like 3 or 4 other guys.
There was a handful of people, and that was it. And so I think the goal of the reviewer was different, and I think the outcome of doing the reviews was drastically different. And both of those things that, you know, the changes that have occurred on there have really driven what we see in terms of reviews that are posted. And if we're being really honest, there's 2 things that are splashy when it comes to reviews. One are big bottles, so allocated bottles. Yep. And 2 are when people shit on a bottle, right?
Yeah.
Those are the 2 things that people really tune into. And I think sometimes people tune into those big bottles to see if you're going to shit on it.
Yeah.
And I hate both of those trends.
Yeah, you know? That is true. I feel like there's like this, I don't know what you call it, but like the intrusive thoughts of like every fall when the stuff comes out, when the releases come out of the rare whiskeys, you're like, which of these like things that people pay secondary prices for like $3,000
is gonna suck.
Is gonna suck. Because like me as someone who can't afford it, it's almost like this. I want one of them to be like garbage, so I can be like, that sucks for you people who support secondary. Like,
yeah, and
you got a crappy bottle,
and it's nice because you don't feel like you missed out, right? It's like
that too.
Yeah, I can't afford it, and it doesn't matter.
But it was garbage anyway. My Wild Turkey 101's better.
but if somebody would pour it for me, I'd be happy.
Yeah. All right. So anyway, those were the top 20 most reviewed whiskeys. How different, James, do you think the top 20 whiskeys in terms of rating are going to be?
Oh, it's going to be drastically different. It's going to be all fancy, shiny, allocated bottles.
All right. So let's see. The top scorers.
Yeah, this is wow.
So number 1, George T. Stagg, 2022. Number 2, George T. Stagg, 2019.
And if there were more George T. Staggs that were reviewed, they probably would still be up at the top.
Yep. Russell's Reserve 13 barrel proof batch 3. Russell's Reserve 13 barrel proof batch 2. Lux Row 12 double barrel. Now that one I'm not familiar with. Have you tried that?
I've seen it posted. I don't know much about it. I never tried it. I don't drink much Lux Row stuff. Okay. And I will say too, before we move on here, you can see, I think this is following exactly what you were talking about. the two stags were also two of the most reviewed bottles
Yeah.
in the year. And then, of course, Elijah Craig, which we already talked about.
Right. We have William LaRue Weller 2022 at number 6.
I'm shocked that I got high ratings.
Number 7, Found North Batch 07.
Which is the only bottle I own
Which is
on this entire list.
Yep.
So I brought it.
Yep.
It's with us, and it's a damn good bottle.
And I'll have you people know who are listening and not watching, the Found North scored 9.02 out of 10, which is only 0.3 behind George T. Stagg 2022. So, whatever that means.
Yeah, I don't know. And it's funny because I know, batch 7 was known to be a good batch of Found North, but we're going to see batch 5 and batch 6 on here.
Yep.
And those were considered a little bit lesser from most reviews I read. And that's what we're falling out on here. But to see 3 from Found North is pretty crazy.
Yeah. Especially because like Canadian whiskey, like we've talked about before, historically not well respected, generally speaking in the whiskey community. As well as like Found North, I feel like wasn't even on the map until.
No, and that's what it was funny when you sent me this. I was like, I didn't even know about Found North until about 5 or 6 months ago. And now 3 of their whiskeys are on this list. But I will say this, getting to the kind of like shiny allocation thing, all of their stuff is old. The one I brought has an 18-year-old age statement on it, and a lot of the liquid in it is older than that. They're all super high proof, and they're like $180.
Right.
So it is kind of that fancy look what I got bottle.
Yep. So rounding out the top 10, we have Parker's Heritage 16 Double Barrel Blend, Found North Batch 9, Found North Batch 10. And then it gets into a couple slightly findable things. Number 11, we have Barrel Seagrass Rye 16 Gray Label, which I hadn't heard of, but you said was really good.
Yeah, and you can find that around some places. I just went to a tasting in town, and that was one of the bottles that the barrel folks brought, and it is really damn good. There's no question it's really good. But it's pricey. I can't remember the price point, but it's around $200.
Oh, geez, yeah. Found North Batch 6S Second Summit. So another Found North. Maker's Mark Cellar Aged, which is a new release that they just came out with last fall.
And I really, really want to try that, but it was one of those that exists, but you just never see it.
Yeah. We have Thomas H. Handy 2022.
2022 must have been a good year because
Yeah.
we have lots of 2022s on here.
Elijah Craig Barrel Proof Batch C923, and then Elijah Craig Barrel Proof Batch C920 are at 15 and 18, and then Elijah Craig Barrel Proof C919 at 21. So Elijah Craig is, we knew this. We've seen this online a lot, but it's interesting to see some stats backing it up that Elijah Craig is certain barrel picks of that are just like people online go crazy for.
Oh yeah.
And so I brought some out. I've got B519, which I'm sure all the Elijah Craig fanboys would be like, oh, that one's garbage.
That
like
one's crap.
you can't, and I agree. But I guess my point is like almost none of these whiskeys of the top 20, the only whiskeys on here that you can go to a store and purchase is number none. Yep.
There's none of them.
Number none.
Yeah, there's 0. The closest you could probably get is some Stag Juniors, but you're going to have to pay a lot more for that than what retail is. Probably some of the Elijah Craig barrel proofs will pop up once in a while.
And they will, because some people don't know immediately
which ones
are the hot ones and which ones aren't.
But I will say, as soon as that buzz gets out, those damn things are gone. Like, I wrote all of my friends who hoard Elijah Craig barrel proof, and none of them had the C923.
Really?
And that was, I think, given best bourbon of the year by Breaking Bourbon.
Oh, wow.
And so as soon as that kind of shit happens, like, the bottles just fly. And I've never seen it. None of my friends that I contacted ever had a bottle or had a chance to get a bottle. So, that's sort of what happens. I didn't check my other Elijah Craigs. Maybe I have one of those batches. If I do, I'll bring it, but I doubt it. It's not my thing.
So here's my problem with lists like this. I don't doubt that these are 20 of the best bourbons available, last year. There's almost everything on this list that I've had a chance to try a different, at some point, like Stag or Weller or Found North. They're all excellent. However, they're almost, is even beyond the fact that none of them are findable, is any of these a consistent release product? That maybe the Lux Row 12 double barrel.
No idea. I get what you're saying though. All of these are going to vary from year to year.
These are all special editions of things or single barrels of things,
specific batches or year releases, or whatever the case may be.
So none of this is even indicative of the quality of Elijah Craig or the quality of like
Found North. Yeah, just because these three are really good doesn't mean anything else that's going to be what you want.
Right.
And so, yeah, I think it gets back to what I talked about in the beginning is how useful is that list?
Right.
One, you can't buy any of it. So the only thing it's going to do is make you look at that list and feel shitty about your own collection because you don't have any of those bottles, right? And you're not going to get any of those bottles. And I tried to reach out to folks who have huge collections to see if I could get samples, and I couldn't even get samples. So where are you, like... what does that do for you? And then you're exactly right. It's not even informative about future releases or what you might want to try. I mean, I guess if you see Found North that many times on the list, you can be like, you know what, it's probably going to be good. Right. But that still doesn't mean that the next batch you get is anywhere near this because they do different blends every single time. So, yeah. I don't know. I don't know how informative it is. I don't know what it's telling me.
So the only thing that I find interesting about this is because it's a crowdsourced platform, right? And so this is the closest that I've seen as far as an ability to get like a industry-wide representation of scoring or of popularity contest, more or less.
Well, and the other aspect here is these are just random reviewers, right?
Right.
Like we know nothing about who these people are or what kind of scores they typically give.
Right.
So and here's the bottom of the barrel. I didn't see this one.
So here's the bottom of the barrel. So the lowest scored whiskeys with at least 5 reviews are ranked number 1.
I like how it's ranked number 1.
So you
were the number 1 worst whiskey.
And I do like he threw out all reviews that were lower that hadn't been reviewed at least 5 times.
Yeah.
So no outliers, But Jack Daniel's Old Number 7, not surprising, average score 4.27. So we have now officially determined that George T. Stagg with a score of 9.3 is at least twice as well as Jack Daniel's Old Number 7 with
going
a score.
Back to the twice as well, all the way back to season 1 for those who've been listening that long.
But it's funny because like there's only so many points you can give it, but I appreciate that. Unlike what I will say, unlike real reviewers, like people on YouTube, people in magazines and stuff, people on Reddit actually used the bottom half of the scoring range for some whiskeys. They were willing to say this is a bad whiskey.
But if you look at this list, it's all stuff that most people would consider bottom shelf, mid shelf maximum, right?
Right.
So how many of these people ran into a sample of Elijah Craig Barrel Proof Blind and was like, this is shit, and gave it a 3?
Yeah.
See, and so that's the other part is there's a lot of bias in terms of name and expectations, right? Like when you do a review of Stag, people expect you to rank it highly. And there's the name recognition, there's all of the stuff that comes with Stag. If you do Jack Daniel's Old Number 7 review and you're like, this is the best ever, I'm going to give this a 9, people are not going to pay attention to you anymore, right? Yeah. Again, there's expectations with it. So how much of that is baked in to the scoring too?
So actually, someone just asked that. Josh Adams said, I find that there's a bias amongst different social medias for certain brands. Do you guys find that the list is representative of the general landscape or a product of this subreddit's ecosystem? And then he said,
bonus points for putting ecosystem in a question, by the way. I appreciate that. As an ecologist, I appreciate that.
And then he said, basically that these kind of lists are helpful for flippers, though.
Oh, absolutely.
Which is absolutely
that's a good point. I never even thought of that because I don't do that. Yeah. But yeah, it makes total sense because it tells you which ones are going to be sought after, where the buzz
Right.
is, that kind of stuff. I do think there's a bias internally from reviewers. Again, I think name recognition is a big one. I think if that company sends you samples, that's kind of hard too.
Right.
Right. I heard a whole discussion about this yesterday on an Instagram live. Like, how do you rate something poorly if somebody goes out of their way and they send it to you?
Right.
And so that's certainly a piece of this as well. Like, if Buffalo Trace wrote us tomorrow and they were like, we're going to send you samples of George T. Stagg, I would literally shit my pants. I would be so happy. Like, so what are the odds that I'm going to go into that knowing it's Stagg, and I'm super happy because they sent it to me? What are the odds that I'm going to be like, yeah, this one's not living up to reputation?
And the thing is that it really doesn't matter how well intentioned you are. There's going to be some bias.
Oh, there always is.
Which is why we're always very upfront when we get bottles from distributors or from the brands that have sent us stuff, and we say, like, they sent us this. You know, take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
But that's also part of why I don't score stuff too, is like, I know I have implicit bias. The best I can do is I can give you my impressions of something and whether or not I think it's worth buying.
Well,
I agree. And beyond that, to break it down is like, you know, or I can say this is a standout. You know?
I think the most important parts of a review are what is the flavor profile?
Right.
Like, what do I pick out? Because that's going to tell people
whether they like it.
Right. Hey, I like maple. But I don't like barrel char. Like, it gives you some sort of way to determine if that's going to be a bottle you like. And then I think the other piece is, would I personally go out and buy this and drink it again? I think that's meaningful too, especially coming from people like us who have had a tremendous amount of whiskey, right? But I don't know if it matters if I give it a 9 or an 8.
Yeah, that's fair. So after that we have, the worst is Jack Daniel's Old Number 7, then Bullet, then Basil Hayden's, Elijah Craig Small Batch, Ancient Age, Wild Turkey Long Branch, Maker's Mark.
Matthew McConaughey is mad right now.
Yeah,
5.14 for Matthew McConaughey.
No, he can go hang out with Kendall Jenner in the in the reject
in the bad celebrity pile. Yeah.
We'll have to get a bottle of that and try it.
You know, I remember trying it not too long ago, and it wasn't very good.
Yeah.
But yeah, we should get a bottle and try it.
Maker's Mark. That makes sense.
Just regular old Maker's Mark.
Woodford Reserve. Okay, so this one's surprising to me. Woodford Reserve and Michter's Small Batch. Now, Woodford Reserve, I would hazard a guess, if you went back and did this same thing 5 years ago, before everyone was trying to flex as hard as they are now,
right?
Woodford Reserve was one of the, and I know this because I was in the community, 5 years ago, watching people review stuff. Woodford Reserve was often touted as like the best $30 bourbon you could get. Like by a lot of reviewers. A lot of reviewers would review it and they'd be like, oh, this is so good for $30. And now it's the bottom of the barrel.
Well, and the other thing you have to keep in mind here too, and this is something I didn't think about when we were looking at the list, is that when reviews first started, Woodford Reserve only really had one product. Now they have all these other products too, right?
Yeah. And
so I think people look at base products and automatically want to score them lower because they're leaving room for the other ones.
Yes.
And that's not always the case. Like I would probably personally rather drink regular Woodford than the double oaked because that just doesn't match my flavor profile for what I'm looking for. And so I think that kind of gets stuck in there too. And that's why you're starting to see Wild Turkey 101 ratings a little bit lower too, because I have all these other special releases from Wild Turkey that should be better.
So I think it's a combination of that. And I think it's the combination of that is a standard release that has now been out for a long time and nobody's excited about it.
Yeah.
People are bored of it. It doesn't have any hype or buzz around this. And you see this with all sorts of products when they come out, right? When like car reviews, when the Toyota Supra first came out 4 years ago, in 2018 or 2019, or no, I guess it was 2020 was first model year. All the reviewers are like, oh, it's so cool. The Supra's back. Like, yeah, it's technically a BMW. It's not a Toyota, but we don't really care. Like, it's so cool. And now 3 years later, it's kind of nobody cares that much anymore. And every now and then when people review it, they're like, yeah, this car's not very good. You know, it's just a BMW, and like, because the new cool thing is Toyota has some of their own cars, and people are like, oh, this one's so much cooler. Even, you know,
Yeah.
it's like, how do we be the cool kids that like
for
the
sure.
next thing?
And I think a lot of what you're seeing with special releases from distillery is distilleries recognizing that and following suit.
Yeah.
Right. Like Wild Turkey very rarely had special releases. Woodford didn't really do too much. Makers just had regular makers for years. Right. But when these things started to pop out, then you started to see more big distilleries come out with these special releases to keep up with the Buffalo Traces, really.
Yeah. Josh says, don't lie, guys. I know if Defiant Single Malt was actually sent you a bottle, you give it a good score.
I would. I'd give it an 8.
Oh my gosh.
And by the
No.
way, this Elijah Craig Barrel Proof is bad.
It's real. Yeah. It's really, it just smells like,
Oh,
yeah. So,
it's like if you took raw peanuts and rubbed it around on the inside of a barrel.
and then burnt some plastic in there.
It's not very good.
No, it's not.
This was not on the list, so
No. And so we brought out a couple of these, like a Russell's Reserve private barrel selection to taste.
we have the poor man's version.
the poor
The
man's
ones
version.
that appeared on the
Although
list.
we did try the 13-year-old
Yeah.
last season or the season before, honestly.
and it was good.
And it was good. But we didn't think it was like that crazy much better than
and-
Wild Turkey Kentucky Spirit, to be honest.
No. And again, it comes down to batch numbers, right? I
Yeah.
don't know which batch we tried. I remember one of them being a little sweeter and one of them being a lot more oaky.
Right.
And I just don't like super oaky bourbons, and so it didn't hit right with me. But you know,
And so what I would like to see happen with this kind of thing going forward is like someone someone consolidating this information into what is the most consistent product, in terms of like, forget like individual barrel ranking the highest. If you take the scores of all the Elijah Craig barrel proofs together and average them, where
Right.
does that come out? Because to me, my experience, the ones I've gotten to try are so mediocre that like I have a hard time fathoming buying a bottle of this and putting it next to Stag and like all these other things on the list, right?
Yeah.
Whereas you go to Wild Turkey and whether it's Kentucky Spirit or Russell's Reserve or the Russell's Reserve 13-year, I know I'm going to get a really solid product, and it might be stellar, but it's going to be like above good either way.
And I agree.
And I think that's a vastly more important conversation.
Oh
to
yeah,
have.
it would be a much more helpful list, right?
Yeah.
Because you can look and see consistently this ranks really high, consistently this ranks really high. And I think it would be cool to see some affordable bottles pop up into that list of like, okay, Rare Breed, which is $60, is consistently pretty high, right? It ranks pretty high up on the list. So it would tell you that that's a good buy. I agree. I don't know how you would go about doing that. And you would need a lot more time than I currently have to
and
do
a
it.
lot of you would need someone who's like really into data analysis.
I'll talk to my friend Chris. He's a data nerd, so I'll get him on it and see what he can do.
So here's another section that because there's a couple more sections and then we'll wrap up because I know you asked to get out of here
I'm
at
good.
7.
Yeah.
So
we're good.
so this section is how to score vary with proof, and I wanted to ask you this question because
I bet it varies
you're a proof
widely.
snobbit.
Yeah.
So he said, here's a plot of score versus proof. And
The logarithmic fit.
yep. And so we see, if I can zoom in here, that as proof goes up, the score goes up.
Now it's not a great fit.
It-
It's
yeah,
only
but-
it's only 0.22. So you're looking
Right.
at a best fit line.
Okay, so that's why I wanted to ask you because I have no idea what any of this means. But
R squared of 0.22 essentially means that 22% of the variability between the two axes is
Right.
accounted for. So it means that 22% of the effect you're seeing, rating higher
Okay.
for a higher proof, is just the fact that it's a higher proof.
so that's not too bad. What's really fascinating though is based on my other analysis, fitting price paid to whiskey score gives an R squared value of around 0.52.
Oh, so it's more about price than it is proof,
Right.
gets back to your point of flexing.
Right. So and obviously some of that is going to be when when producers have a better product, they know they can charge more for it.
Yeah.
It's just the fact is Buffalo Trace isn't going to sell you Stag for $40, even if it only cost them $10 to make, because they know you'll pay $1,000 for it. So,
yeah, that's interesting because it's telling you that price is going to affect the rating a lot more than proof will.
Right.
And I would argue that 10 years ago that would be completely flipped because you didn't have as many high proof bottles out there as you do now, and prices were really muted. Everything was sort of in the same ballpark.
That's true. There was not much variability.
No. Now everybody has high proof options. So you can go out and buy, Wild Turkey 101, you can get Rare Breed at 120. So there's readily available high proof options, but the spread in the bottle prices is ridiculous now. When you're talking and we saw that on the list, every single one of those is going to be multiple hundreds of dollars to get your hands on.
Right.
So it makes sense. And if you and I went out and we bought a bottle, like if we went out and we paid $800 for a Stag, I don't want to rate that low.
Yeah, you personally will feel some pressure to.
Yeah, just you want to like it because you spend so much money on it. So that makes sense to me. I think that's a good find.
So let's see. Then he talks about value for money, and he put together an interactive plot of this year's whiskeys. All the whiskeys with at least 5 reviews, and this is also an interesting thing. But basically, what this shows is that as your price goes out to the right, it tends to shoot up, but mostly it happens around $50.
So $50 is sort of the cutoff point where we start to get higher ratings.
Right. So you see like a lot of these dots are between 5 and 6, under $50. The highest it goes is about 6.4. And that's like early times, Wild Turkey 101, Russell's Reserve 10, Buffalo Trace single barrel picks, Knob Creek 9-year. Those are all hovering in the 6 mark. As soon as you go on the other side of $50, now you start shooting up. You see scores all the way with like Stag Junior at 8.5.
Yeah.
You see way more outliers.
Right.
And so I think this kind of backs up what I was saying about when you have a product of a certain level of quality, now you can be flexible in your pricing, because once people figure out how good it is, they'll be willing to pay it.
Right.
And so you start to see a lot wider range of scores. But you also see a floor. Nothing to score below 6 after you get past $50. And so whether or not that's the reality or not,
it's probably really reflective of what's being reviewed.
Hey, look,
right?
Elijah Craig 18 at 6.5. There we go, with a price of 170.
That's the outlier.
That is a real score.
Yeah.
I back up that score.
I think what this is telling me is that the data around this is probably more helpful for most people than the list itself, right? It's telling you that when you look at these reviews, you have to keep those kind of factors in mind. Proof is going to have a small impact, so you have to sort of take that into account. And I would imagine that it has the biggest impact within a brand. So if you're looking at Woodford and you're looking at across a range of proofs within the same producer, I bet it has a larger impact.
Yeah.
And then, of course, price is going to be a big impact here. So if you see a really expensive whiskey rated highly, you have to assume that the price had some sort of influence on that rating.
So I'm going to wrap up with 2 things, James. One's going to make you mad. One's going to make you happy. Which one do you want first?
Which one makes me happy? Let's do that.
All right. The highest proof whiskey reviewed this year was a 2 Souls 8 single barrel.
Seriously?
Reviewed at a tongue-searing 146.96 proof.
That was our rye.
and it outscored Stag
Ah,
with scores of 9.2 and 9.4 respectively.
awesome. Wow. Yeah, I didn't know that anybody was actually paying attention to our stuff
Yep.
on Reddit. So that's pretty good. So can I claim on our website that we're better than Stag?
Technically, yes.
Okay.
Um,
Based on a sample size of 2.
yes. And so, hey, you might pull, and that is, yep, the Two Souls Hazmat Wisconsin Rye Finish in Rum Barrels. He titled the review "Ludicrous, Insano."
And it's funny because this one is probably out of the 2 ryes that we released initially, this is the one that probably got the lower scores. Like the single barrel, the first single barrel we released, people went crazy over. So it's good to see this one getting that high because I think the other one would have got even higher.
Yep, and I guess Breaking Bourbon named it one of their best ryes.
They did,
2022,
yeah,
which
yeah.
is very nice. But I thought his review was great. Nose, boozy, orange feel, apricot and papaya, bubblegum, honey, chamomile, toffee, ginger snaps, butterscotch, coconut, enigmatic.
Ooh, that's a good word.
That's a good word.
Yeah.
This guy's got a good vocabulary. Naughty old leather encyclopedia.
What the hell does that mean? Whatever. I like
I don't know.
what kind of encyclopedias are you reading?
Some fat barrel char. He said,
It's entertaining.
I haven't experienced one like this before. It's rich and syrupy while being juicy and effervescent. This stuff is really balling out on my tongue. There's a massive numbing tingle on the early mid-finish that gradually subsides to more oaky notes roll in. It's crazy like you'd expect a hazmat to be, but without being overly hot. Not too dry, especially for an 8-year-old rye. Wild stuff. Incredible and all-time favorite.
Wow. I need to reach out to this person.
Yeah.
I don't know who did that.
I think it was Dr. Meats.
Awesome. All right, I'll reach out to Dr. Meats. We'll have a talk. So what's gonna make me mad?
The one that's gonna make you mad is that, well, maybe not mad, but funny. The whiskey with the longest name was on here. Was the Starlight Single Barrel Huber's
Huber cigar
Huber's Cigar Batch Rye Amberana Finish Russell's Renegade Justin's House of Bourbon Barrel Pick Cigar Bird MXXIII.
Wow. That is stupid. That is a lot of words.
That's incredible.
I wouldn't even review it if you said that to me. Like, this is going to take, it's a lot of cut and pasting going on as I go through. But I might actually lean into that. And every time, instead of saying like this whiskey, I would write the entire name out every time I mentioned it, just for fun.
Yep. So, anyway, I thought that was kind of funny. But yeah, anyway, so thank you to Reddit for reviewing some whiskeys this year.
Yeah, and giving us
last year.
giving us something to talk about. And I like that there's data here, right? There's data showing you what's influencing some of these ratings.
Right.
And you and I have talked about that, but it's nice to kind of see it backed up by actual statistics.
Yep.
And they even used an R-squared value, which is kind of fun. And then
It's called science, James.
it is very sciencey. And then the fact that we were on here, that you see us listed on here, is pretty cool.
Yeah. You're changing the industry.
We're getting buzzy. We're getting
You
a
are
little
getting
buzzy. Yeah.
But yeah, so just as closing thoughts, I think it's cool to see, what the community is doing with whiskey in terms of people's individual reviews and like all this stuff. But keep in mind that when you're checking out lists like this, it's very obviously, as we looked at, skewed by price, rarity, and hype.
Oh,
and,
yeah, for
and
sure.
so when you see like these same whiskeys popping up a lot, it's not because they aren't excellent. Most of these are. Like I've got a little bit of that Found North Batch 7, and it's
really good.
It's a stunning whiskey.
Yeah.
It's absolutely fantastic. Fully deserves 9 out of 10, but that doesn't mean that there's not a whole slate of whiskeys right under that threshold outside the top 20, like the regular Russell's Reserve that's not the 13-year, or like the, some of these Maker's Mark private picks that
Yeah, they're really good.
are really good depending on, what particular staves they chose. They're a more unique thing. Some Four Roses single barrel stuff that's like, it's not going to make those top 10, top 20 lists, but you can find it. It's relatively affordable. And you're going to get a good bang for your buck. So.
And you got to think that if it was $150, it probably would be rated higher.
Also that.
So
yep.
It's a good point to keep in mind.
Yep. So anyway, with all that said, thanks for joining me this week, James.
Yeah.
I'll let you get out of here. Thank you guys for watching. And until next time, cheers.
Cheers.